Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to our very first episode of 2021. I know you all have had a rough year. We have too, but we're ready to get this thing started off right. So glad you guys could join us, fellow travelers, on this road to liberty. And this week we have a very special guest that you guys should be all familiar with since we had him on the show way back in the middle of last year. Welcome back to the program, Mr. Spike Cohen. Spike Cohen, how are you doing tonight?
It's awesome to be back on, Nathan. Thanks so much for having me on, and thank you, Road to Liberty followers and viewers for tuning in.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for coming on. I wanted to get you on in the aftermath of the 2020 election. As our audience should know, you were the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party going up against Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And we got to see you over in Lincoln when you came over to this part of the country. That was a lot of fun. Had a good time doing that. So I kind of wanted to get you on, get your perspective on the race, how you thought it went. You know, some of the things that you guys did, what you think you did very well at, some of the things you thought you could have done better on. But the first thing I want to go over is I think we all could have benefited from having you on the vice presidential debate stage with Mike Pence and Kamala Harris.
Right.
So I kind of want to get your perspective on how surreal it must have been watching it, going, man, I could do so much better than either of these two assholes.
Correct. Yes.
What was that like?
So it was very much that sentiment. I'm watching this, and first of all, we streamed the VP debate on our show, The Muddy Waters of Freedom, and I was basically giving my live reaction to the debate. So not only was I reacting to the debate just as a human being watching it and being someone who's running against the two of them, but also as someone who's, an audience is tuning in to hear what I would respond in these questions. And it was basically the same reaction that I had in both cases. I'm watching two people being asked mostly substantial and important questions. Some of it was kind of pandery or not really that important. It was more just designed to create a divide or create a spectacle for people to watch. But for the most part, the questions were substantial and important things that people cared about. And both of them just gave their talking points over each other. And neither of them acknowledged how it was their parties working together that created the problems they were debating. And they never actually got into serious talking points on what they were going to do. So, for example, they brought up the murder of Breonna Taylor, the killing of Breonna Taylor due to the no-knock raids. And Kamala Harris talks about it first, and she makes it racial. She immediately just starts talking about race. She doesn't talk about police brutality. She doesn't talk about the war on drugs. She doesn't talk about no-knock raids. She doesn't talk about any of the reasons how it actually happened. She talked about what would work for her voter base, which is just talking about race and then not offering any substantial solution to it. She mentioned decriminalizing marijuana. Well, they weren't there for marijuana. So that had nothing to do with it. She didn't talk about ending qualified immunity. She didn't ending no-knock raids. And so then it went on to Mike Pence for him to answer his question and him to answer the question. And he immediately pivoted to talking about how it was dangerous to say things that potentially could harm the lives of our brave law enforcement who are protecting our lives every single day on the front line, blah, 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 right? So he didn't talk about it. He did mention briefly that, Kamala Harris, I don't know if it was in that conversation or another one, he mentioned the fact that Kamala Harris was a brutal prosecutor who prosecuted nearly 20 times as many black people as she did white people. But he did that to dunk on her. He didn't then say, and here's how we should stop that from happening in the future. He also didn't talk about ending the war on drugs. He also didn't talk about ending no-knock raids. He also didn't talk about ending qualified immunity. They use talking points that make them play good cop to their base and bad cop to the other voter base, so that they keep their base voting for them and they keep the other base voting for the other guy out of fear of them. That's how the Republican rope-a-dope, good cop, bad cop, lesser evil system works. And we watched that on full display. Had there been me or another libertarian or really anyone with common sense on there saying, Hey, isn't the fact that Breonna Taylor got killed, isn't that because of qualified immunity and no knock raids and the war on drugs? And wasn't it Joe Biden who introduced most of those bills and then oversaw their enforcement when he was in the White House? And isn't Donald Trump doing that now in his time in the White House too? And couldn't we end those things and get rid of it? That is something that could be asked in the literal 15 seconds that it took me to just say that. And instead they just, BS'd each other for an hour. So it was weird watching it, but it was also frustrating, and it also drove home that we're never going to get what we want from Republicans and Democrats. They are the same side, and they work together to create a theater of opposition when the reality is they work together every day to screw the rest of us over.
Well, that's the thing about being one of the two main parties is you never actually have to talk about anything of substance. You can just rely on the fact that half the country is going to vote for you no matter what. And the goal here is not to sway swing voters. It's just to not piss off your own voters enough that they'll stay home. Yep. Right? This was the Hillary Clinton conundrum, where she pissed off her own people enough. Her own people didn't like her so much that they just didn't get out to vote.
Yep.
Right? Whereas someone like you or Joe Jorgensen, if you guys managed to get on the debate stage, you would actually be expected to say something of substance because people don't know who you are, right? Everyone knows Donald Trump, Mike Pence, Joe Biden, blah, blah. Everyone knows them, but none of them know Spike Cohen, right? None of them know Joe Jorgensen.
Exactly.
You put up this brand new face in front of the entire country. You have one shot to impress them.
Yep.
And I always thought that, like, you or out of the last 3 libertarian tickets, that you're probably the one guy I would have liked on the stage the most out of all of them.
Thank you.
Right? Because, I had no problem with Gary Johnson or Joe Jorgensen, but I always thought that if I was to ask somebody to explain libertarianism coherently, you and Larry Sharpe would probably be my top 2 picks for that job.
That's so fair. Yeah, I like Larry.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. And I'm honored to be included in the same breath as Larry, because Larry is a fantastic communicator of libertarian ideas. It's like you said, Nathan. The way this works is that they're just making their base happy, because, like you said, roughly half the country is going to vote for them, roughly half isn't, and it's just a matter of basically keeping your base excited. But another part of it is keeping the other base hateful of you. It seems counterintuitive that part of the strategy is to make half the country hate you, but here's why it makes sense. The reason that it's important to make the other half of the country hate you is so that they'll only vote for the one that they think has the best shot of knocking you off, even if they suck as much as you do. Even if, and we just saw this where people go, well, how could it be possible that this many people voted for Joe Biden? They didn't vote for Joe Biden. They voted against Donald Trump. And frankly, for all of the cult of personality that Donald Trump has built around him, most of the people that voted for Trump were just voting against Joe Biden. And they want it that way. Mike Pence wants you to vote against Mike Pence. If you're going to vote against Mike Pence, to vote for Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris, if you're going to vote against Kamala Harris, she wants you to vote for Mike Pence. And the reason for that is because if and when a third party is able to actually get enough of a foothold to win or even come in second, their entire system is screwed up. Now they have to actually give solutions and provide value to voters. They can't just say, well, I know I suck, but that guy sucks even worse than me. So what are you going to do? Vote for a third party and then that guy wins? It's a rope-a-dope. It's a shell game. It's a huge con game. And especially when you look back and realize that, look at this stimulus bill. When it was time to hand us crumbs of our own money and hand trillions of dollars yet again to the same multi-billion-dollar corporations and big government agencies that put them in office in the first place, they all got together to do it. And even Donald Trump beat his chest and said, I'll never sign this. I'm going to veto it. This is a terrible bill and I'm going to fight against it. He ended up signing it. Yeah. They're all working together.
Well, one thing you can always count on Donald Trump to do is to cave in is to speak a good game and cave in.
And then cave in, yeah.
Yeah, but like you were saying, that there is also a bit of a vicious cycle to getting the other side to hate you.
Yes.
Because what that always translates into is not just hatred of you, it's hatred of your voters.
Everyone else. Yeah.
And if you can convince your side that the other side hates you, not you the candidate, but you the voter. If like Donald Trump telling his supporters, "Hey, Democrats, they hate you."
They hate you.
That's a very strong and powerful motivation to get your side out voting, because you're not just voting for a political candidate at that point. You're voting for your cultural and social survival at that point.
Yeah. It's an existential thing. You're now voting for your survival. Like you said, not just your cultural survival, your actual existential survival, for the survival of your community, for the survival of your family. You're voting. Look at so much of the messaging was, we have to stop Joe Biden and the radical left. And of course, the radical left meant anyone who didn't like Donald Trump and the Republicans. And on this other side were them saying, we have to vote for Joe Biden and against the alt-right and the racists. And of course, the alt-right and the racists meant anyone who didn't like Biden and the Democrats. And what it basically boiled down to is, if your neighbor isn't your neighbor that you have a disagreement with, they're now your enemy that you hate, and they hate you. Now you can be nice and divided against each other, and it makes that much less likely for you to take a step back and say, "Oh, I see, they're all in on it together. This is all a huge scam. We're being played. Me and my neighbor are being played against each other while they work together all day long. They have cocktails together. They go out to, eat together. Their kids are going to the finest schools together that we pay for. They're living, the lavish life on our backs while we struggle to make ends meet. And they got us hating each other over it. It's a classic divide and conquer.
Yeah, and the people who benefit from this divide and conquer are always the political elites of either party. I mean, if you think about it, it's not very hard to do this. I mean, you got different political ideologies getting the news from different places. They're on different social media platforms. Mm-hmm. They're hanging out in different circles. They're not interacting with each other. They're listening to their political elites tell them what to think. Yes. And it's a short-term benefit for Republicans and Democrats to do this sort of thing, to divide the country up, because a more impassioned base, even if you end up losing some of these elections, you have a more impassioned base that's going to let you get away with more than they otherwise would. Exactly. So if your goal is simply to have political power, that's a very powerful strategy to use. Long term, of course, you put so much division in a country that you poison the well entirely, and that has a chance of backfiring on you. But we'll see. We'll see if something like that comes about later on.
Yeah, so one thing I want to add to that is, it only backfires if you ever let up on it. The moment that you let up on it, all of that division within the country that you've been creating they're going to go, "Oh, so you guys are in on it together." That's why the rhetoric has to get constantly worse. Think about the rhetoric between, say, John Kerry and George Bush. I don't know how old you are. You may have been a kid when this happened, but for those who are old enough,
I remember that election well.
Okay, so there was a lot of hatred, there was a lot of anger, but the John Kerry and George Bush were able to get together and shake hands and talk largely, cordially to each other, even when they were accusing each other of whatever, right? But I remember it was a big deal that John Kerry said that Bush lied. That was like this big threshold that had been crossed, that a presidential candidate.
Do you remember the Purple Heart Band-Aids? Like,
the Purple Heart thing.
Sick burn, a Purple Heart on a Band-Aid.
Yeah. But this. So here's the thing. This is that exactly, like, that was seen as this, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe he said that. Compare that to how Joe Biden and Donald Trump talked about each other and to each other during this race. Now think about what it's going to be like 4 years from now, when it's more than likely Joe Biden versus Trump again, or Trump versus Harris, or Joe Biden versus like Ted Cruz or something like that. And then imagine 20 years from now, if we don't get libertarians into office, when it's freaking, I don't know, Kid Rock versus Ariana Grande or something like that, and they're screaming at each other and saying how terrible they are. Like, it's only going to keep getting worse because it has to. The rhetoric has to constantly escalate and make people feel increasingly divided, so we can talk about the increasing division within this country, so that we don't take a look and take a step back and say, this entire thing is a sham. It's a scam. They're pulling a huge scam on us by making us think that they're enemies when they're not enemies. They work together every single day. Every day they work together to make our lives more difficult for the benefit of them and the political elites and cronies and billionaire cronies that put them in office. This system is a system of theft that robs all of us and with interest, charges us with interest to benefit a very small handful of people. And the second they stop with all of that theater, we realize very quickly what's going on. So they can't stop the theater. But I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
Well, I mean, if anyone doubts that this is true, just remember how quickly a new COVID relief package got put together the minute the election was over.
Yes.
I mean, when we went an entire year between the last one and this one, but the second the election is over, now it's politically beneficial to give everybody a bribe to calm things down so you don't go over to Washington and guillotine your politicians. But you had the unique honor of being the Libertarian Vice Presidential nominee during the weirdest presidential cycle of any of our lifetimes, probably of the last century.
Yep.
Right? So in the middle of a pandemic, states are closing down all over the place. Here you are trying to run a presidential campaign. Talk to us a bit about what that kind of experience was.
I don't know how many people have run for national office where a good number of their events were illegal. So we literally had events where the police were there and we just did it anyway. Like, we hadn't gotten approval, or they pulled the approval, or they'd shut down the venue that we were using, so we'd just do it outside, which was illegal because they didn't allow gatherings in that area. Or like the events that we did in New York, where we would, fly just outside of New York, go in, do a big thing, and then immediately leave. Because, if we stayed there, we'd have to quarantine and stuff like that. Like, we don't, there were so many times that I would do events and the people organizing it would be like, so what we're doing is borderline legal. I'm like, listen, I know that my last event was like that.
This is the Libertarian Party. All right. Don't worry about it.
This is the Libertarian Party during a pandemic.
Just don't get caught.
Yeah, this is the Libertarian Party during a pandemic. We just do the thing.
Have someone down the street yell cops, and then we're all just scatter.
The cops were, the cops were often there. Like in Miami, the cops were there, and we essentially just stayed there. And they had shut down the event where we were supposed to have it, so we just did it outside. And we got a big speaker and started having a freaking salsa party. We turned it into an anti-lockdown protest, and we started dancing for 3 hours. And the whole time, and we're having people come up to the bullhorn to give their stories about how the lockdowns had made their lives so much more difficult and ruined their livelihoods. And we had Univision show up and a bunch of other local and national media, especially Spanish language media, because we were in Little Habana doing this. And we had people yelling and talking in Spanish into the things to the people that were there, and the cops were there the whole time. And every bit, as I understand it, what we were doing was definitely violating the COVID orders as I understand them. And I said, listen, if the police come, then we'll have to decide, if they come over here, we'll have to decide what we're going to do. But we're not going to leave because the police have said that there's some order written down that's, more than likely going to end up getting thrown out by a court anyway, saying that we can't peacefully assemble outside. So we just did it anyway.
Well, I mean, I would expect nothing less from Libertarian nominees. Just do it anyway.
Do it anyway.
And yeah, just fuck the law. We're not doing anything wrong. We're just peacefully gathering, right?
We're peacefully assembling.
We'll call it a protest if that's what we need to do. Well, we're going to do this thing.
And it literally, we turned it into a protest, and we were like, listen, this is now an anti-lockdown protest in the middle of on Calle Ocho, in the middle of Little Habana. And, you tell me if you want to, violate our First Amendment rights. by enforcing this, stupid order from the mayor. It's your decision. And I don't know if it was because they just decided it wasn't politically a good idea, or if it was because there was so much media there, but they let us do it. I mean, we were out there till like 1:32 in the morning. So it ended up being a way bigger event because instead of doing it indoors where no one would have heard us, we were outdoors where literally everyone on the streets in Calle Ocho that night, and I think it was a Friday night, everyone got to see what we were doing. So it ended up being an even bigger deal than if they had just let us do it inside.
Well, hell, maybe it would have been even better had they tried to shut you guys down. I can think of no better press than police tried to shut down libertarian political rally. That might have gotten some good airplay. Who knows?
I was ready for it. I told other people, I said, listen, if you have priors, if you have, or you just don't want to go to jail tonight or whatever, you certainly I don't expect anyone to go anywhere with me. I'm going to stay here. And I didn't come all the way down to Miami in a big bus with my name on it to, duck tail and leave because 6 cops told us we had to go. We're doing this event. So we did it.
Okay. So the ticket this year didn't get the same percentages that Johnson Well did 4 years ago. How did you assess how the campaign did overall? Was it a disappointment? Did you think you did good considering the circumstances? How did you judge that?
So first of all, before I forget, I want to answer this question someone asked. Is Spike doing any more anti-lockdown protests around the country this year? Yes. This weekend, I will be in Sacramento, California. I will be speaking at the Reopen California Now protest. I'm going to be there, I think, at 4:00 Pacific time, the 4:00 local time, on the western steps of the state capitol in downtown Sacramento for the Reopen California Now protest. I'll be there this Saturday. So back to your question. I am told by everyone who follows these types of things that we did as well as we could expect, and I'll break down what that means. So yes, many people have said we got the second highest number of votes of any libertarian ticket. Awesome. Big whoop. More importantly, I guess, we did the best that any libertarian ticket's ever done during an incumbent re-election race. So usually when an incumbent is running for re-election as president, the voters are much more likely to either vote to keep them in or to vote to get rid of them. And so it sort of creates it makes it a lot harder to get voters to vote for a third party. Also, as you said, there was a pandemic and there were it was harder for us to be able to travel, and it was harder for us we had to spend a lot of time just even fighting to get on the ballot. And all things considered, many people have told me that we did the best that we possibly could do. I certainly think there was some tweaking to be done, but let's say that this was the best that we could have possibly done, that no other libertarian ticket could have done better than 1.2%. Everyone who's watching this, raise your hand right now if that satisfies you. Exactly. The reason that this is a bad thing is that we are still reliant on factors that have absolutely nothing to do with our party or our messaging or our candidates or what we do or what we don't do or what we do right or what we do wrong. We are completely reliant on outside factors. Is an incumbent running for re-election? Or is it difficult to be able to travel? Is the media allowing us to have attention? Are they including us in their polls? Things that we have no real control over. And we aren't reliant on that for whether or not we win. We aren't even reliant on that for whether or not we make it onto the debate stage. We're reliant on that for whether we get 1% or 3%. And that is unacceptable, which is why for this entire year, and moving forward from now, my singular focus is on growing this party at the grassroots level into being a dynamic force that affects the cultural conversation, affects the public debate, wins public debates on the subjects and the things that are facing us, so that we can win more races, have an actual voting base to work from, not just at the national level, but all the way down to city council races and everything in between, so that by 2024, whoever we run, if they aren't able yet to be able to win, they at least have a shot in hell of making it onto the debate stage, because this is unacceptable. The era of losing admirably needs to end. We need to build a culture of winning, and we need to build a strategy to be able to win in races across the country. So going to, our actual like kind of a dissecting or postmortem of our race, I think I want to focus on what we did right first, or what I think we did the best first. And what we did the best was, especially during a pandemic, we went around the entire damn country. There were like, I think 2 states we didn't visit. And one of them was Hawaii. And it was because if we touched down there, we would have had to stay there for 2 weeks, which sounds wonderful, being forced to stay in Hawaii for 2 weeks. But A, you're having to stay in a room, and B, you can't campaign. So we weren't able to do that. And then I think, wasn't Wyoming, Idaho, maybe there was like 1 or 2, there was 1 or 2 other states that we didn't visit. We visited 47 or 48 states during this race during a freaking pandemic. I myself visited 35 states. We did something like over 120 campaign events. I myself did over 70 campaign events. We interacted with something like I think 30,000 people. I myself interacted with close to 15,000 people, and that doesn't include all the people we talked to online and through interviews and things like that. All things considered, we did as robust of a campaign as was possible given the circumstances, especially considering in the final month of the campaign, Joe had to return to teaching, which kind of made it difficult for us to be able to continue keeping which is why I kind of that last month, I was the one going and doing everything. All of that to say that I think in that respect, we did everything we possibly could, and we got a lot of local and regional media attention that we wouldn't have otherwise gotten, because they were just looking for a news story. Hey, there's someone running for president or vice president in town. Let's talk to them. The other thing we did well was down ballot support. One of the most important things that the national ticket can do is to get support for much more easily winnable races. People running for city council, people running for, county council, people running for state house, and we had some state house wins as a result. People running for tax commissioner, or whatever. People running for all these different like local races and down ballot races that have a better shot of, if not winning, at least getting a higher percentage. Going and supporting Donald Rainwater in Indiana, going and supporting Ricky Harrington in Arkansas, going and supporting Brad Barron in Kentucky, going and supporting Kerry McKinnon in Texas, and so forth. Nicholas Wildstar in California. Helping these candidates that are running for things. That was where we did well. Where did we not do well? I am always careful.
Fun question.
So here's I have no problem talking about what I didn't do well. I have to be careful in how I talk, because I don't want it to look like sour grapes. And I don't want it to look like I'm bashing our team or our activists. Our team and our activists did amazing work. Almost all of them did it either for free or for absolute or for next to nothing. And often were coming out of pocket for stuff. I would watch grassroots local activists spend, a few $100 of their own money to be able to put together an event that was amazing. I'd show up and there were hundreds of people there. They spent maybe 20 cents for every person that was there. And it was often out of their own pocket. So please do not take what I'm saying as sour grapes or throwing anyone under the bus. I think that the biggest issue that we had was messaging discipline. And what that means is that we often told everyone all the things we were going to do as libertarians. And the problem with that strategy is that it often doesn't focus people in on what the hot button issues are. It often makes it look like you're not talking about the hot button issues, even though you are, but you're talking about it with like 15 other things as well. And it gives people more reasons to look for to not vote for you. So if, for example, we had focused on the lockdowns, the absolutely bungled response to COVID-19, the fact that the FDA and CDC didn't allow testing for the first 2 months that the virus was here, and the fact that were still making it hard for healthcare workers to do their jobs, which was leading to massive layoffs and hospital closures during a pandemic. and then talking about how these lockdowns are an absolute mess. They're just destroying people's lives. They're destroying entire communities. But also, in addition to that, they weren't doing anything to help slow the spread of COVID-19. If we had talked, during the time when the George Floyd murder and the protests, if we had a very focused message that was based on how we have actually actionable resources or actionable plans to stop police brutality or greatly ameliorate it, instead of getting involved in this larger cultural conversation that is a dead end for actually getting things accomplished, there were a lot of things that were missing there. And I think the reason that there were things that were missing there is because initially the campaign wanted to talk about things that ended up not becoming what anyone wanted to really cared to talk about. And, Joe primarily initially wanted to talk about ending the wars and bringing the troops home, and nuclear energy to help save the environment. And what was the third thing? Reducing the cost of healthcare through deregulation. The healthcare one was the only one that was really what anyone was talking about at that moment. No one is really talking about the wars. And when you try to shoehorn the wars, and I'm ready to end the wars, bring the troops home, dismantle the military industrial complex. If no one else is talking about it, if everyone else is talking about the fact that the government is ruining the lives and livelihoods of the people through these lockdowns or through police brutality or through, destroying the healthcare sector at the time when it was needed most, and we're sitting here going, yeah, we need to get out of Afghanistan. It just didn't connect with people. And when you present all these different things, when you constantly show up and you go, we're going to end the wars, we're going to end the Fed, we're going to end the ATF, we're going to end this, we're going to end the war on drugs, we're going to end war on sex work, we're going to, and you do all these things, someone can go, I don't like that one thing, I'm going to vote for Trump. Or I don't like that one thing, I'm going to vote for Biden.
Yeah, that's always the thing. That's always the way it is. Third-party candidates are always under a microscope. And if they're not perfect on everything, we're just like, well, I'll go vote for the pedophile instead. They seem like the safer bet. But yeah, the issues around this election cycle were so unique to 2020, right?
Yes,
this was something that that campaigns had to be able to adapt to, and not go into the campaign season with the preset, this is our issues to talk about. Right? Because nobody back when they were running in the primary was thinking COVID-19. Like that wasn't a thing.
No.
People were looking at COVID and being like, oh, COVID. Yeah, right. That's going to be the next SARS or the next Ebola scare. One of these diseases that pop up, the media freaks out about it, and then it just quietly goes away and nobody ever thinks about it again. But that didn't happen this year. Yeah. This year, it was all about the lockdowns. And it wasn't just your campaign that didn't talk about it as much as I would have liked. The Libertarian Party hasn't been talking about it as much as I would have liked. A lot of libertarians seem to just be like, oh, lockdowns, whatever. Well, I'm like, no, this is a big deal. People are, in California, you can't even go out on a bike ride. That's a huge fucking deal. That's something libertarians need to talk about.
Yep. So what is happening, and I have to, literally 2 weeks from now, there is way more that I can actually, you'll probably need to bring me back on, because 2 weeks from now, there are many things that I've got in the works that I literally cannot talk about right now, but we'll be talking about shortly. And everyone who's watching this will know, I won't even have to tell you, within a couple weeks, you'll all know what I'm talking about. But I am in the process of working with National to make sure that the messaging of the party is strong and unified, and actually demonstrates in a way that everyday Americans can connect with why our way works and why the way of the Republicans and Democrats does not work. And these lockdowns are a perfect example of this. Because of the structure, so much of what's going on at National isn't because the libertarians in National don't care, in the National Party don't care about these lockdowns. It's because the very structure of how messaging is done right now is not able to respond to things quickly, I guess is the best way to put it. And I have to be careful how I'm saying things right now, but a lot of that's going to be changing very soon, and hopefully, and we will be the Libertarian Party will be the party that is the voice against government encroachments on our lives and our rights and our freedoms, and not just in the abstract, all your freedoms all the time, but actually connecting on real demonstrable things that are happening every single day that connect with everyday Americans, so that we're not just coming in and going, you know what, we believe that you own yourself and that the government's actions against you are a violation of something we call the non-aggression principle. Like, actually talk about how these lockdowns are destroying people's lives and are not actually helping to slow the spread of COVID or do anything other than make the living of the average person much worse, and their livelihoods much worse, and their safety much worse. And that the reason that these things work poorly is because this is what happens when you allow a small handful of sociopaths to decide how everything is done. And, you know, tying that to the greater libertarian message, but bringing them in on that initial statement of these lockdowns are garbage. You know, they're garbage. They don't make any sense. They are anti-science. And here's how we can fix this and actually solve the problems that we're facing, and apply it to that and every other subject every other issue people are going through on every other subject: healthcare, housing, education, immigration, foreign policy, and everything else. But do it in a way that connects with normies. You know, our messaging often connects well with us, but we're already here. I shouldn't at this point be struggling to tell a libertarian stuff about being libertarian. At this point, we can talk to the other 97% of people who either haven't heard of us or who have a bad take about what we think, because it often has not been messaged well. So, like I said, a lot more on that coming very, very, very soon.
Awesome. So, last thing I wanted to talk about is Joe Biden is going to be president coming up very soon.
Mm-hmm.
This election has just been an absolute shit show from the very beginning. And with all the legal challenges, it's funny seeing the Trump supporters